We have to always change our management strategies a bit around that. Sometimes we can make a full box split in May where you take 3 frames of brood and put it in like 10 frame equipment with a mated queen. And if you have those made before the 1st of June, oftentimes those will produce you a pretty good honey crop. So we'll do it either in the styrofoam nuke or in full equipment. And we do that. And then usually about June 1st, we switch from mated queens to all queen cells. So that's when we start doing our grafting. And then we'll fill up these styrofoam nukes. We try to do it right at the beginning of June if we can.
From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is PolliNation, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and people like you who are making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Associate Professor of Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. It is another edition of the Commercial Beekeeping Zone here on PolliNation. I'm joined, as always, with Harry Vanderpool from Vanderpool Farms up in the hills above Salem. Harry, who do we have this week?
We are very blessed to have Curtis Miedema from Medina Honey Farms out of Barhead, Alberta. Curtis reminds me throughout the discussion that although we're both commercial beekeepers, there is no cookie cutter design for such an operation. There are as many designs for commercial beekeeping and other similar businesses as you can imagine. And today he describes things that I think American beekeepers on the West Coast specifically are going to be very impressed with, which is stationary beekeeping. When we think of stationary beekeeping here on the West Coast, we think of 10 hives in our backyard. How about 10,000 hives? And he runs a wonderful family operation, multi-generational beekeeping operation with a lovely family, and a lot of very interesting approaches to beekeeping. I know everybody's going to be really interested in what he presents today.
Yeah, I agree. We were talking about this earlier. Just there's so many dimensions of having a beekeeping operation that's geared to honey, to making honey, and putting it in the barrel. It's so exciting, and it was so interesting to hear. There's a part in the interview where he talks about just the intense queen rearing they do for a short period of time, unlike a California queen breeder that's always turning out queens. They do this, they've got this really great pulse of drones, and they make these queens and in some ways, milk that excess that they have of this pollen and nectar inflow and make out nukes. It's really fascinating.
Very fascinating. And on top of all of the things of having a family and all of those obligations and running an excellent beekeeping operation, he also serves as president of the Alberta Beekeeping Commission and has some comments about that. So we always respect and admire people that look out after our industry, and more than just themselves and their family, but they look out for the industry, and he certainly does.
That's well said. Well, let's head up to northern Alberta this week on PolliNation, and I will say it is the hockey playoffs, and we were talking about northern Alberta. Go Oilers. Okay.
Okay, let's go.
All right, roll them.
Curtis Miedema, it is so wonderful to have you today on our podcast, PolliNation. And 1,200 miles north of the U.S. border, things are starting to wake up there, I understand. We're very curious to hear about beekeeping in Barhead, Alberta, and your operation. It sounds like an awesome family operation that we always like to see. So ready to hear some tips about how your year goes.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on here. It's always interesting just how close we are to each other and how we're in totally different worlds. People, they assume that Canada's just all ice and Eskimos, which we are some of the time, but now things are kind of thawing out, and we're geared up to start our spring work. So here, kind of beginning April, we've gone through all our hives and give them a pollen patty, and now we're hoping soon to start unwrapping and really work in the hives and get rolling. So
Unwrapping? What is that?
oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we do this foreign thing where we wrap up all our beehives in insulated tarps and get them ready for the winter. We usually do that in October. So our bees for about half the year are covered in an insulated tarp. So we have a big heavy insulated thing, and we give them a vent out the top. The style of my wraps, we have a piece of pipe that comes out for them to ventilate, but also to fly out of. And our bees are mainly dormant, I would say, from about mid-October till about mid-March. There's little to no flight, and sometimes they'll be completely covered in the snow.
So these are double deeps.
Yeah. So the majority of our operation we run in double deeps, and if they're in singles, often we'll make them into doubles before the winter. And because we need to store just an immense amount of feed into them too. So we open barrel feed, which sounds like a horrible idea, I know, like in places where they're full of bees, but every site we have 40 or 48 hives, and we'll put 5 or 6 drums of sugar in the fall. So that's part of it. And then we also have an overwintering building where we keep a few kind of oftentimes like some later splits or some singles that will winter inside our building.
So for 6 months insulated, do you have a gut feeling on the weight on those before wrapping up, or just as heavy as you can get, probably?
Yeah. So if you can't lift them, they're about right, is how we gauge it. As unscientific as that is, but usually when we go around and before we start wrapping, we'll kind of gauge them that way, as we'll give them a lift, and those 2 double deeps, you shouldn't be able to budge them off the ground. And we do kind of we'll start as early as late August with feeding and feed throughout September, but we do try to stagger it out a little bit because that queen is slowing down. And as she gets less and less brood in the hive, they can fill more of that comb up with feed. So they're really, really heavy. And it's always amazing. You think, oh, these will be good, but they consume a lot over that long of a winter.
Yeah. And so what is the ETA then annually on wrapping?
So typically in my operation, I shoot to be done by all my wraps off and dead hives cleaned up by the 1st of May. So that's kind of the goal we go by. And some years it's a little earlier, some years a little later, depending on weather. But that's usually mid-April. Our overnight lows are finally, staying above freezing, and we can access all our locations too, is another part of it.
Yeah, nice.
There must be willows starting to come into the colonies already, or is it a little bit ways off?
So I think it's about 3 days ago now I seen the first pollen. And so I would say typically it's within the first 3 weeks of April. On an early year, it can be right at the beginning, a later year towards the end. But yeah, usually we get a really nice pollen flow in April. And I say once we get the pollen, that's usually when my hives stop dying from winter loss. And whatever's alive when it gets to the pollen flow seems to take off.
What would be the floral sources shortly after the willow then?
So from willow, we also have poplar and then maple trees as well. We have, kind of a different variety. But so we'll kind of run those right up until we get dandelion, which is usually, I would say, mid to late May. Typically, we get a dandelion flow. And by that time, we're usually getting really nice weather. And May's a big growth month for us, so that, the hives will double in size and things are really taking off. So that's typically when, if you can hit it right and do a lot of your splitting through the dandelion, it seems like that's kind of what we want to align with.
What do you do about when you're making your splits this early about queens? Do you overwinter queens in banks or nukes, or how do you approach that?
So I would say typically we're banking all on imported queens right up until June.
Cool.
So, there's different beekeepers that have all different management styles and ideas, like I'm sure anywhere else. But, I would say majority of spring management, we all rely on, mostly American imported queens.
Interesting. It sounds to me from everything you said, you're about a month, you're 1,200 miles north of the U.S. border. And we're down here, we're about 500 miles south. Sounds like you're about a month behind us is all. Of all the maples, the dandelions, everything kind of lines up about a month off. Is that right, Adoni?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, about a month. Interesting.
Just before we go on, what happens in your operation after this point? And I think we're really interested to hear how you are able to get your numbers back up and also make increases if you're planning to grow. What has been, we've got down here in the US, it's been a terrible year for colony losses that extend all the way back to last summer. How has it been in Alberta this year? What are people seeing as they unwrap?
It's a real mixed bag. I'm talking to some beekeepers that are, happy. It's been the best bees they've had in 5 years. And then, it seems like we all take our turn of taking a higher loss year. And some beekeepers, the guys that did really good last year and they're bragging about their good honey crop, they're kind of taking their turn on their higher losses. It seems to kind of coincide. And we go through this, this nasty cycle that we haven't completely figured out how to break, where you have good bees, you have good mites, they're hard to kill. And then, we have even a longer time that we're hands off of our bees. So it seems like that stress of winter is when all your problems kind of show what you had. And so, yeah, I would say it's mixed. I don't think there's a real clear one story across the board here.
Okay, thanks for that. And that is a story that we also hear here in the U.S. is, you have a great year and then the next year you take your beating, and it is so hard to kind of recover from these losses, even after a good year and having some revenue come in.
Yeah, and it hurts your pride the most, right? Because you're feeling one year and then you're feeling really crummy and then you're feeling good. And then, yeah, so we'd love to figure out a way that we could, level that out a little bit. And it does seem like, going right into the spring management story, seems like our bees need to be worked and they need to be split. And with these mites, these super mites that we have now, it's even more of that story. Like, if you leave these ginormous hives, there's just no way to get in there and penetrate those mites in that massive brood nest. So breaking the cycles, breaking up your hives into smaller colonies and doing it in a timely manner seems to be the kind of the ticket.
Well, why don't we rewind or fast forward to that dandelion flow? And so you're ordering queens in, and tell us a little bit about how, at least in your business, how you replace those losses.
Yeah, so typically we use a 5-frame styrofoam nuke. We have these, and they're a great tool that we use in our business for a lot of things. They have a screen lid, and then they have a regular styrofoam lid. So they work great for transporting because you can pull this styrofoam lid off, put the screen lid on, and then plug the hole. So you can make these hives up throughout the day, move them around the countryside, and you have everything contained. Then also, they're styrofoam. They're insulated. I feel like they rear more brood with less bees because they're not fighting to stay warm, because we're always trying, that's a holdup for us, is these cool nights. And if you get that, so that's a tool we use quite a bit to make earlier splits. You can get a frame of brood or 2 frames of brood in there and put a queen, and they can really grow quickly. So we go around and we do a queen checking round, and the good hives will cherry pick a frame of brood out oftentimes and put them into these nukes. And we start that oftentimes in May, it's always depending on the weather, depending on our bees. We have to always change our management strategies a bit around that. Sometimes we can make a full box split in May where you take 3 frames of brood and put it in like 10 frame equipment with a mated queen. And if you have those made before the 1st of June, oftentimes those will produce you a pretty good honey crop. So We'll do it either in the styrofoam nuke or in full equipment. And we do that. And then usually about June 1st, we switch from mated queens to all queen cells. So that's when we start doing our grafting. And then we'll fill up these styrofoam nukes. We try to do it right at the beginning of June if we can. We have about 5,000 of these, and we'll fill them in a few weeks, put in a frame of brood and a few shakes of bees in there. And we drop a queen cell in and come back in 3 weeks. Then oftentimes they've, had a chance to grow. We give them a little shot of feed in there, and because it's a whole styrofoam box, you can actually just pour the feed right inside the colony and they clean it off the floorboard.
Wow.
You don't need
Yeah,
to
because there's no bottom entrance.
Right. Yeah. So there's just a hole in the side, and that's proved to be such a great tool because you don't have to have more stuff. You don't need pails, you don't need feeders, you don't need, and we'll still, because we're quite spread out here. We got a lot of room. We're open feeding all the time. So we'll put barrels of feed in every yard, even throughout the spring to just keep them building. And
Very interesting.
And it works well because I feed my neighbor's bees, but they feed mine. So we're all doing the same thing. Sometimes they'll give me a call and say, hey, when are you going to feed that area? And we'll try to coordinate it that we're doing it at the same time.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's the great thing up here, we work really well together as neighbors. And there's always a bit of healthy competition for some bee locations or areas, or, we all like to brag about our crop that's a little bigger than theirs or a little less or whatever. But being able to work well with the neighbors is very important. And that helps us be able to do what we do with, things like open feeding and even making a honey crop. If we all crowd each other out, we're hurting each other or ourselves as much as we hurt anyone else. So
I have one quick question. I know Harry will want to come in. I will. So you put a queen cell and this one frame of brood in June in a 5-frame nuke. Once that queen gets laying, it must, do you have to transfer it out? Does it outgrow that box, or what do you do?
Yeah. So typically they're in that nuke box for about a month. So if we make them up, late May, they're by the beginning or the end of June, we're transferring those into 10-frame equipment.
Okay.
So, and if everything aligns correctly and you're having good weather conditions and those queens are mated right, everything's done right, those first nukes that we make will often make us 50 pounds of honey still.
Oh, nice.
From a frame of brood in May with a queen cell to, the majority of our honey coming in July. By the time middle August comes, it's done. And yeah, the early ones will, make us a nice crop, or not. That's, 50 pounds. It pays its way for that year.
Wow.
Enough of the late ones we do, and they're just, they're mooching off the system. They're not giving us anything. So
Your nuke with one frame and a queen cell makes as much honey as our full strength hives here in Oregon. So well, I want to go back to your comments that I thought were wonderful about you working together well with your neighbors. This is something that's different in different regions around, the U.S. and probably up in Canada. But we also share that mainly here in Oregon. We take a great deal of pride in that. It's really nice to hear a testimony like you gave there about you and your neighbors working together, because that's something worth working towards. And obviously you guys are doing real good up there, because it makes all the difference in the world to us that we have faith in our fellow beekeepers and help each other out. And I know areas, I won't mention them, around where it just isn't so. And a lot of fighting and infighting, and that's just not what we need in such a tough agricultural sector as beekeeping. We need to be working together. That sounded great, Curtis.
Yeah. To speak to that a little more, I know, kind of echoing what you said, but my one neighbor and beekeeper made the comment. He said, this is hard enough when we're all working together. He said, why would we try and work against each other? Because he'll call me and he'll just be like, oh man, I'm seeing something funny going on with these hives over here. What have you seen? Or, they'll be like, well, what do you think out in that area? I'm going to check my bees today and see if they're ready to pull. And I'm like, oh, swing into a couple of my yards and see what you see. And, sometimes we're seeing different things, which creates great conversation too. But oftentimes it's really helpful to be like, oh yeah, watch out for this, or I'm trying this, see what you think, or hey, I'm ordering this. What do you think? And, we'll bulk order things and do things. And yeah, in the end, everyone's better off when we're kind of striving to the same goal.
So I see you're president of the Alberta Beekeepers Commission. I'm sure a lot of good connections are made there between beekeepers. Could you maybe tell us, we don't have commissions down here with our beekeepers. We have associations, state associations, and some regional ones within those. What can you tell us about a beekeeping commission?
Yeah, so like you said, I am the chair of the Alberta Beekeepers Commission right now. I do remember when there was a time we were an association and we switched over to a commission, and I know there was definite benefits to it. I'm not well versed enough to speak to all of them, but I can tell you a bit about what we do. We represent all the beekeepers in Alberta, and we're funded through a per hive basis. So every hive that's registered in Alberta, we can invoice a certain amount to every producer for the hives they have. And in turn for that, then we're representing them when it comes to government affairs or, legality things or any of that. And even on some major issues, if there's, stuff with this tariff talk and with different labor regulations, which is always a struggle because we have a lot of imported labor. And so the commission's always going to bat for the producers on all those things. And recently we've actually, I say recent, I think it's already been like 5 or 7 years that the commission has started up a tech team. And I understand there's a bunch of tech teams down in the US as well. So the tech team is actually employed to the commission and in charge of them. So we collect this levy, and we help fund research projects. We help fund the tech team. We're able to do so many things because we have really good buy-in from our producers.
I like the idea of a more stable funding stream. The way the structure you just described does give the commission a more predictable funding stream for those things, for those benefits, than having a lot of separate associations like we have here in the States. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It's kind of like all these small organizations. It's always like, to get results, it takes money with whatever you're doing. It takes work, it takes time, it takes having good people and all those, that all equates to money. So yeah, having the support of our producers financially is a big deal. And that being said, we are a refundable commission. So if someone's not happy with the work they're doing or doesn't feel represented, they do have an avenue that they can get some of this funding. They can get their money back.
Very interesting.
If I can, I do want to just put a bow on the nuke making. I can imagine having to do that at the same time as having to get colonies ready for a honey production, like the stress of June and having to balance, like queen rearing. I've seen it in operations before where it's taken on as a kind of thing on the side, and it can be really hard to manage and kind of get the workflows. Tell us a little bit about how you manage all those competing demands on time, in terms of, it's one thing to get colonies ramped up ready for honey production split, but it must be quite another to integrate queen rearing and nuke making in the whole business.
Yeah, it is interesting. That being said, so many people are always like, oh, you must be, just waiting for honey harvest, and you're probably aren't that busy now. And I feel like in June, it's way more hectic than July and August. It seems like keeping everybody organized, keeping everything happening, and the timing on all of it, right, is like, you want to split the hives at the right time. You want to get them transferred out of the nukes at the right time. You want to you don't want to be checking your queens too early, which is the worst thing because it's hard to be patient. But yeah, so it boils back down to I really got a lot of good people working for me, and they've been with me for a long time, and they help with all of that. And so they, I got guys that are looking after the grafting and organizing the queen yards, and then I got good crews that go out and make all these nukes. I mean, not everything they do is perfect, but they overall, yeah, it's a family business, but it's a big thanks to all my employees. They're the ones that do the work, and they're the boots on the ground every day.
Is it kind of like 1 or 2 rounds of grafting? Like you're not grafting through the summer. By the time you get into honey production, that closes down, or are you rearing queens right through the summer?
Yes, no. So we graft for a very short window, and I'm hoping to do more. I'm hoping to start maybe a week earlier, and then maybe go and possibly even try some later season. But right now we've done all our queen rearing like in 3 weeks. So we ramp up. We have a really simple, we're kind of cowboys about a lot of it. We don't do too much real precise, with our cell builders. Even we use the 5-frame styrofoam nuke as a cell builder.
You do?
Yeah. So I put 3 frames of brood into that styrofoam nuke, and I feed it a whole pile, and I graft into it 3 times. So I'll graft into it, say this Tuesday, I'll graft into it next Tuesday, and I'll graft into it the Tuesday after that, and then it's free to go. It's done its job. So I've just found that it takes so much less brood to do it that way. And I don't have cell finishers. I don't have incubators. I don't have any of that stuff. I just drop my cells in there, and, you watch the calendar real close, and 10 days after that, we pull them out. And we've even found it easier. We only graft twice a week. So we have cells coming out twice a week, and we'll just make our nukes a day or 2 ahead of time. And we found that a little bit easier to manage as well, instead of having cells coming every single day and, being ahead, being behind. So yeah, it's a pretty simple, it's pretty dumbed down system in a lot of ways.
Sounds pretty smart to me. Sounds pretty smart to me. And the queens that I'm getting are $35 a piece now. So, commercial, from a commercial breeder. So that's a good day's work you're describing there. What do you select for? Do you select for traits, or just your best hives, or in your weather conditions? Is there something special, or?
I kind of take my hat off to any hive that survives up here. Some people, they go, oh, I can't believe it. Especially people that are just starting in bees. They're like, oh, I can't believe my bees died. And I can't believe, I'm like, man, we should be more surprised that they lived. It's 6 months they've been cooped up. And I mean, I think of these poor bees that I put in my wintering building. I just took them out the other day. Must have been on Friday last week. They haven't seen the light of day since October.
Wow.
And so they were pretty happy to go for a good cleansing flight. You drop those hives and get out of there, because, it's a bombing range after that. And so we don't do a lot of real in-depth selection. We go off good hives that are strong. I guess like feed preservation is a bit we look at, like, we're obviously not grafting from something that starved over the winter, but if it's got good feed stores, it's got a clean bottom, it's got, good eggs. And we typically kind of pick on that, something that's survived a year of our management. Put up with everything we've thrown at it, and put up with the crazy weather we have up here. And
so do your crews, as they're driving around, they'll just put colonies on the truck and bring it back, and that'll be is that sort of roughly how it works?
Yeah. So often we'll even select a few yards to start with, and we'll say, okay, you know what, this yard really stood out. And we try to graft off stuff that our own stock even. So we say, okay, this was a yard of our nukes, say from last year, or even a yard of our nukes from 2 years ago. So instead of loading those hives up and breeding them to a breeder yard, we just bring our cell builders there because they're just a few 5-frame nukes.
Nice. Wow.
And then I had this guy working for me, and we were working a hive yesterday, or working a yard of these bees we took out of the building, and I came across just a real standout hive. So I pulled it off the pallet and set it beside, and he said, "Oh, what's the deal?" I said, "Oh, that's our real scientific way of marking our breeder queens, you know? Set off the pallet." And I said, "If you come back next time and you don't think it's good, just put it back on the pallet." Yeah, we do what works. It's sometimes a little bit simple, but yeah, like I said, it works.
How many of these nukes
Well-
do you make a year with cells?
Like last year, I had a higher loss. I actually made, I have just short of 5,000 of them. We made them all up early in May with one frame of brood and a mated queen. Then we transferred them all into equipment, and then I made them all again with a cell. So we made like close to 10,000 of them last year.
Wow.
And so, yeah, and then we'll transfer them into, like I said, into 10 frame equipment. We haven't found a way to get them to winter in those small colonies yet. We keep talking about trying different things, and I might try to put some in my building and, apply some fondant, or we have done it, years ago. My dad used to bring them, across the Rockies and put them in British Columbia and winter them there and go back and forth. But yeah, so, but none of those things have really stuck that we keep doing it.
I remember this whole styrofoam nuke came from Dave Taggart, and I remember Gilbert Wolf and Dave used to truck them down to the Lower Mainland.
Yeah. And
The
so
old days.
my dad kind of copied that system. So he was able to purchase these nukes, and we were doing the same thing where you'd create your queens and you'd add bees to them and bring them to the Fraser Valley. And a little bit of a funny story with that. So we would put them on like in 8 packs on a pallet. They worked perfect. You'd have 44 by 44 inch pallets, and then we'd put 2 railroad ties or like 4x4 blocks on top to keep the lids on. And the great thing about it is if it floods, the whole unit floats. I still remember, and Lene brought it up hearing these old stories too, but I remember being a kid in a rowboat going down the stream after these nukes, and we'd load them on. But once you'd break that 8-pack and you'd take a couple off, they'd all start flipping over and tipping into the water. So it'd be a mad scramble. And then you'd come paddling back with your boat with these styrofoam nukes on there.
Wow.
So they also float, which is another pro.
Well, Curtis is in a very, very enviable position, at least for me, is he works stationary hives as much as possible and doesn't move bees around for pollination. Down here where we are, our income is predominantly, 12 to 17% honey, and the rest is commercial pollination. And I look at his operation and his techniques, and I've been changing my design. So I'm really got my ears open today. How wonderful it is to have good, healthy bees in stationary locations like you do, presumably staged for a honey flow that begins, when does it really begin up there?
So I tell most people, we make probably 80% of our honey in the month of July. And it typically, it kind of follows the canola bloom. The canola is the big producer for us. Alfalfa, clover, wildflowers, everything else will produce, but consistently, canola is our big one. So yeah, we make usually about the 5th to 10th of July, we're in full bloom canola, and it usually kind of peters out the beginning of August. So it's that big month to make it all happen.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So there again, we're a month ahead of you. So ours is June, and it's blackberries down here. Blackberries a big deal. There's other things, but very interesting.
Yeah. So I know I've spoke with beekeepers in that go to California and do all the moving around and all this stuff. And I've had to tell them, like, sometimes I actually have to pick up my hives and put new pallets on them because the old ones have kind of rotted into the ground.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So there's beekeepers, that I neighbor with that have 4,000 hives, and they don't even have a Hummer bee. And,
Cool.
so it's totally different. I mean, I feel very fortunate that we don't have to chase pollination. I mean, there's days where I'm pretty envious of the steady income and that to look forward to, right? Just for planning and doing things. The downside of just being a honey producer is the volatility in the honey market and, just the lack of constant demand. Those kind of things can be challenging that you kind of have to work around, but being home every night is also pretty nice. So kind of finding the happy medium between it all. It's a good life, and I'm thankful for that.
A lovely family, and that staying home at night, that's huge. Family comes first, and I just congratulate you for having that design. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, so I'm such a meathead about all this stuff. I told my kids this year, we're not playing baseball. We're going to raise queens in May. We're doing all this. And then, they phoned me up the other day. Well, we really can't find another coach. So now in all this craziness in May, I'm still going to try to coach baseball. So
Good for you.
softball, sorry, it's softball. But yeah, it is nice to be able to draw, or try to strive towards having that balance between family and work and being around.
Curtis, I did want to maybe come back around to the commission. So this is I have being a Canadian and remembering how tied, Canada is to exporting honey. All this talk of tariffs must be, really jolting Alberta beekeepers. Give us a picture of the Alberta beekeeping. Many of our listeners may not know, for example, that Alberta is has the most colonies of any province in Canada, may not know that it's so dependent on honey production, may not know the honey flows. Give us a picture of the Alberta industry and sort of how it's, dependent on labor, which is difficult. Give us a picture of the Alberta industry now and the challenges, the kind of conversations that are happening now in the current environment.
Yeah, so Alberta's a little bit unique even within Canada. It's the one province that kind of shoulders against the Rocky Mountains and turns into prairies throughout. So although we're not like anywhere near the largest geography or have the most farmland or any of those things, but we do have the most beehives. So Alberta has 40% of all the beehives in the whole country. And so that, I think it represents just over 300,000 colonies in Alberta. And I guess part of it is maybe we just have a little bit of diversity. Like, I think out of the 300,000, there's about, I think it's 60 or 70,000 that are doing hybrid canola pollination in southern Alberta. So the other provinces don't have any substantial pollination like that. So a lot of producers that have grown big and, having that stability, even within our operation, in the big growth years, when I was younger with my parents, they did also do canola pollination. So, that's kind of what got us, into the commercial size. But yeah, still the majority of the bees are strictly honey producers, and the majority of the producers are still making a living on honey production. So that is, I guess, quite unique versus the United States. But, within the prairies in Canada, like, so Saskatchewan is our neighbor, and then Manitoba over, they have even more reliance on the honey, and because they don't have the canola pollination. So I think that's part of the uniqueness that did make Alberta grow into having that many hives. And also there's too many Dutchmen here. They all like having lots of beehives.
Oh, yes, indeed. Those Dutch people. I hear you.
I suppose that, the one thing that people, I think a lot of American beekeepers remember when there was anti-dumping, issues in the American market, Canadian beekeepers got behind those. There has been a strong partnership, especially with Alberta beekeepers and American beekeepers going back to the 80s, that, it's good to remind people of that there is the U.S. and Canadian industries have worked together over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. It, we look at the American beekeepers very much that we're on the same page with them. I mean, we're very reliant on the supply of queens. I would say the majority of the queens that come into Alberta are from California and lots from Hawaii as well. And so, yeah, we very much value the partnership. It used to be the package bee industry was really large, right? So many of the, when there was the founding years up here, so many of the people were just replacing their stock every year from California. And we're working hard as a commission to be able to get back to that, where we could source good replacement stock from the United States. Because I think we could do even more, and we could produce even more honey if we had the availability of good stock.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we appreciate the Americans as, you know, one of our largest honey buyers as well. You know, the United States is right neck and neck with Japan, depending on the year, but there's a lot of our honey that goes to the US. So for us, it's in our best interest to keep that relationship strong. And yeah, for me, we see some of the Americans coming to our conventions, and I've attended some of those, and it's always, you know, you sit down and you realize we actually got a lot more in common than we do different. So it's good to have that close working relationship. And then you even see, like, you know, we have people working for us like Adoni, and the Americans take him, you know. I don't know if too many people know that, but yeah, Adoni used to be employed up here in Alberta.
We swiftly closed the border to anybody with the name of Melithopoulos after we got him down on this side. So,
Harry, do you have anything that's sort of burning that's you'd like to ask?
well, just to ask about the crop size and the size of your operation, I assume when the honey extraction season starts, especially where there's canola here and there in your operation, that you must be just at a dead sprint getting that honey out of the comb and into the barrels.
Yeah. So, I mean, we are in a good area for honey production. And I mean, the stories are endless. They used to be way bigger crops, but I don't know how much of that to believe. But, you know, there's back in the day with red clover and different things, you know, guys were saying we'd have 300-pound honey crops. But I would say now we're more about 150-pound honey crop is about average up here. The last few years have been a bit tougher. We've had, you know, droughts, and we've had fires with smoke, and, you know, all different conditions that every area deals with. But yeah, we're pretty thankful up here. We have long days. We got, you know, endless fields, like you said, in which areas are canola. You know, canola is everywhere here. So we don't even have to look around for it. It's kind of in everyone's crop rotation. So if it's not here, it's across the street. And so, you know, I would say majority of our hives are all within flying distance. And yeah, we got a short window. So we really put boots on the ground and get out there for that first, you know, that month of July and August. It's go time.
I think what Harry is talking about is granulation. So we have crops like radish, other brassica crops, and they're notorious for granulating hard and fast. That's what you mean, Harry, right?
Oh my goodness, that canola, I think it'll granulate in the bee before it even gets to the comb. I stole that joke, by the way.
Yeah, well, we have it. The worst thing you can do is give your guys a long weekend, especially it seems like later on in the season. You just watch. I got all clear pipes in my extracting room, and then you'll just watch this honey and it'll just turn rock hard. So it's definitely a challenge for us. It seems like later on in the season when we're dealing with cooler temperatures, and the crystallization's worse. But yeah, it's a challenge. And when you're kind of hanging on and you leave your boxes on for that extra 5 or 10 pounds you think you're going to get, then you bring it home and then you spin them and then you don't get 5 or 10 pounds. You know, you got to leave that in the box.
Yeah.
So yeah, honey granulation is a challenge for us, but we try to get through our equipment, you know, get around every few weeks and get them boxes off, get them extracted and let it crystallize in the barrel.
Well, you're just getting started this year, Curtis. So take a big deep breath because it's coming. It's coming.
Thanks so much, Curtis, for taking time to talk with us today as well before the storm.
Yeah, no worries. Well, thanks a lot for having me on, and hope you guys have a great season down there.
Thank you
I
so much.
hope everybody will take a moment and do a Google search for Medina Honey Farm up in Barhead, Alberta. They have a beautiful website and some just lovely fauna and floral sources up there that you can take a look at. Very great website you have there, Curtis.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, you guys take care. Have a great day.
Take care. Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links from each episode are available at the website pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's a form at the website where you can pop in and say hello and give me feedback. If you want to support the show, remember to leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcast mothership you use. And finally, if you have the means and you want to help support my lab's effort to document bee biodiversity in Oregon, visit OregonBeeAtlas.org and follow down to the donate button where you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Endowment. Every little bit helps. See you next episode.